Hello, the rain has returned to London today, and that's a relief for us because we were already wearing our waders to get through 1,500 pages of the Mandelson files.
Well, Helen, we don't want to get tranche foot. It's just sensible dressing. Before we get into it, we'd love it if you followed us on Instagram. We are at intheroom.pod. You can also watch us on YouTube. We're In The Room Politics. And if you've got a burning question or comment, sometimes about how shiny my face is, you can email us intheroom@independent.co.uk.
So I'm Helen McNamara, the former Deputy Cabinet Secretary.
And I'm Claire Watson, a former Special Advisor in Number 10.
And this is In The Room. What we're talking about today is...
You'll never guess.
In line with everyone else, the latest tranche, one of our favourite words, of the Mandelson files, which were published yesterday. We're going to be doing a lot more kind of looking down, looking up and consulting bits of paper today, which obviously makes me super happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sign of how big this particular tranche is that Helen has not printed the whole thing off. She's taken the coward's way out.
I've had to go electronic. It's real. Yeah, it's terrible.
Well, of course, let's just quickly explain where we are. I mean, lots of people have seen this coming, but in February, the Conservatives pushed this humble address in Parliament, which has compelled the government to produce what is now 1,504 pages of documents about Peter Mandelson's role as US ambassador or UK ambassador to the US and how he got there and his dealings in government. And it's also brought in a load of quite embarrassing text messages and that kind of thing. So just to remind everybody, this is rooted in Peter Mandelson's links to the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein and how he came to be our ambassador to the US and then how he came not to be our ambassador to the US.
And the government was forced into, although you can't really hear the being forced in the way that they're proclaiming all the transparency, proudly proclaiming the transparency of the humble address. But the government was forced to publish all of these documents by a vote in Parliament. Our last episode we did in this was called All Filler, No Killer, where we were quite clear about the amount of kind of guff that had been published alongside some slightly more interesting stuff. And I'm afraid to say that we are in a very similar position here. Although there's a lot of pages, not all of them shed any light on anything.
Yeah, exactly. It's 10 times as many pages. But Helen, how about a quick run through of what in fact is just a load of nonsense in there?
Well, the pages include an article in the New Statesman written by Peter Mandelson, which was published anyway. It includes 3 or 4 transcripts of speeches which have been made, also widely available to the public.
Including a speech by Pete Hegseth, who's the US Secretary of War, which is also publicly available.
Also publicly available. There's a transcript of a Donald Trump interview, I think, which, again, also published.
I was quite pleased to see 8 copies of Peter Mandelson's resignation letter.
We think there are 8. There might be more. We got a bit cross-eyed counting the number of versions of the same thing in terms of the email message that Peter Mandelson sent out when he'd resigned. There are 46 pages, which are just the printed out versions of Microsoft Teams notifications for meetings.
And then there are just pages and pages of essentially redacted emails just with the people who were receiving them. So there's sort of half a page of email addresses and then just nothing.
And then when you think, oh, this might be quite interesting, what you tend to find is there's a lovely crest of a government department at the Foreign Office.
Which you were pleased to see.
I love to see a crest, as you know. I love to see some great formatting. But sadly, it's not just all about the formatting, which is a shame, obviously. But you'd have a lovely crest. You'd have a dear, here's Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary, and then the title of something that looks quite interesting, like this is our position on US and Israel and Palestine. And then you've got 2 pages of absolutely nothing.
Just asterisks.
Just asterisks, all redacted, and then like yours, Peter Mandelson. It's like there's absolutely nothing there.
Very juicy. I think that is one of the things that the kind of big defensive line from the government has been, we have been so incredibly transparent. And I think the problem with an enormous kind of dump of information like this is that by being so transparent, you're actually being quite opaque because the real details that matter aren't in there. And being so incredibly clear, you're actually not being clear at all. And I think just by producing loads of stuff, some of which is embarrassing, they think it's like a good defence to show that they've fully complied with the humble address. But the real questions we want to get to, i.e., what was the Prime Minister's judgment? Why was Peter Mandelson made the UK's ambassador to the US, we still are none the wiser on.
No, and it makes my defender of government heart a bit sad.
It's having a time of it this morning,
it's
that
not,
heart.
It really is, because we shouldn't be here in any way, shape or form. So we shouldn't be here in terms of the appointment of Peter Mandelson as the ambassador, knowing what we now know about, was going to get a bit Rumsfeldian, but knowing what we now know about what was known at the time about Peter Mandelson's relationships with Jeffrey Epstein when he was appointed, we shouldn't be here in terms of that shouldn't have happened in the first place. We shouldn't be here in terms of the way this whole thing has been handled. We shouldn't be here in terms of having to publish this extraordinary amount of information in such a weird way. So we talked at the beginning about the humble address and where it had come from. So what the humble address is an amazingly kind of hot wiring of parliamentary and constitutional and government processes. So it's Parliament demanding to see information. There's no optionality about it as far as the government goes. So you're basically seeing government done in the fresh air, if you like. It's like, and the scope of the original humble address, which was back in February when Angela Rayner was very strongly on the attack for Keir Starmer. It was before all of the, well, it would pick a point where there was troubles in the Labour Party in terms of their attitude to their own Prime Minister. But it was a real high point of anti-Starmerism in terms of the feeling in the PLP. So it was the Labour Party who voted for this.
Yeah.
It was Labour backbenchers who've inflicted this on themselves, on their own government. And it would have been not very difficult at all to, when it had died down a bit, when it became clear the amount of public money and the amount of time and energy that was going to be spent of a government that has 1,000 better things to do on producing this material that gives us this, sum total of nothing. So the government should have gone back to the House of Commons and said, totally understand the need for transparency. This humble address is a barn door. It's going to waste millions of pounds of taxpayers' money on doing something which is inappropriate and improper. We are definitely going to publish all of these things relating to Peter Mandelson's appointment, but we have to narrowly define the scope so as to not waste time and money and to be really precise and proper about what we're doing, and then publish something really quick. They could have done that within a month. Instead of which, it is heartbreaking to think about the amount of time and effort that has gone into producing something which either doesn't tell us very much or actually is net damaging to the reputation of the government. I mean, it is net damaging to the reputation of the government. You do not get the sense of a competent and well-functioning government here. And you have all sorts of extremely important constitutional norms that have just been broken. And obviously, I find that problematic.
Well, one of the things that really occurred to me was the recent Privileges Committee vote, which was whether Keir Starmer should be referred to the Privileges Committee over what he knew about Peter Mandelson and his relationships with Epstein and so on. The government successfully whipped that, and they managed to persuade Labour MPs this wasn't a good idea, and they were extremely aggressive on it. If only they'd shown that kind of gumption in February, because they could, exactly as you say, they could have avoided all this. Every time, every fight you don't take on now, you are making doubly difficult for yourself in the future. And I think this is a perfect example of that. And the only reason I think it is less damaging than it could be is so many people have just priced in Keir Starmer's probably on his way out anyway. Luckily, Andy Burnham's not in here, and does this even matter anymore? But it does matter because, one of the most striking things about this document, I thought, or the series of documents, is after the first tranche, we both said this whole saga is about the Prime Minister's judgment and what the Prime Minister really thinks. And we can see things like there was a box submission which set out his options on the US ambassador posting, and there was no reply from him on that. So we couldn't see what he thought. So I at least thought that would probably be included in this tranche, which it isn't, by the way. No box submissions to him are included in this one. You don't get his voice at all. You don't get any of his opinions. You occasionally get through a private secretary reporting back to people. We discussed whatever issue with the Prime Minister. He agreed. He always agrees. And then eventually there were 3 text messages he wrote to Peter Mandelson, which is in his own voice. And it's during the general election and then just after. And even in personal communications, he's saying things like, thanks. Good to hear from you, Peter. People just want politics that treads more lightly on their lives, or a unite message is more strong than a division one. And it's so good just to be getting on with the job of governing.
Your impression's got really good.
Like so.
Just it's too late, Cleo. It's not going to be any use to us now.
I know, if only he'd done voice notes. But you just think, like, where is this guy? And we are losing sight of what this whole thing is really meant to be about, which is what led him to make some of these decisions and why are we even here to begin with. And there is no mention throughout these documents of any victims of sexual violence.
So I think that there's two really important things there. I think that Keir Starmer is not just absent in the sense that there's hardly any mention of him. He's sort of a completely absent presence. I don't think I've ever seen another situation where you would read the set of messages from the people who are working this closely to the Prime Minister and you wouldn't be able to feel the shape of a Prime Minister. It's not really about kind of, can you see but you can piece together the person and the atmosphere they create and the fact that there's deference and people will be forever referring to. Actually, it's more common to when you'd see a set of documents like this together, you'd get like 15 different versions of people saying, well, the Prime Minister wants this or that or the other.
Yeah.
And they'd all be contradicted because obviously people would be saying the Prime Minister wants what they want and magically that would coincide. And you'd be trying to say, well, hang on a second, how can this Prime Minister who is all over this actually want all these contradictory things? So the absence of the Prime Minister is not just interesting and striking in the fact that there's no actual sign of his person, his voice, his messaging, his anything, but he's not there as a kind of presence in the land in any of the conversations. There's no kind of, well, what does he think and what are we doing and why are we doing this? And actually the Prime Minister was very clear. Most of the time, even with Boris Johnson, you and I occasionally get really cross because we'd get some back channel message from some department where some special advisory number 10 that neither of us could remember the name of had been going around saying the Prime Minister wants. And you're like, hang on a second, what's that? Yeah. There is just no, the Prime Minister wants here. And I think that is really striking. Your much more important point about where are the victims or where is the sense of what actually is the problem here or what is the culture that allows you to get to a point where you just brush over the fact that this is a known association with somebody who has committed some horrible, horrible crimes and that is known against women. I am really, really fed up with hearing the kind of we must think of the victims just said like a piece of throat clearing and a cough when you think in fact, and look, maybe we can be proved wrong. Maybe it is the case that the UK government has thought quite carefully about the actual women who live in this country, UK citizens who were affected by this scandal, who were abused, who every time this story is put to the top of the news, not their doing, not their making, nothing to do with them, they are in fact dragged back into it. Whether it's, okay, they might not be dragged back into it as in personally they're on the front page of the newspaper, but it can't be anything other than traumatising. Yeah. Are the government doing anything at all to support those people? They must know who they are. Like it might be the people think, well, actually, no, thanks very much. I don't really want your support and help. But it will be monstrous that if in all of this, for all of these fine, there's not even enough fine words in here, by the way, about...
There aren't any.
But has anybody actually done anything? Has anybody thought about the fact that those people might need looking after in the middle of all this political drama? Somebody ought to be saying, actually, do you have the help you need? Can we support you? Are there things that we could do?
And I'm to be honest, a bit more pessimistic than you, Helen. I'm almost certain nothing has been done on that because you can bet your bottom dollar it would be in these files because in the abundance of transparency, I think the government would be very keen to show that that is some of the thinking. It's really disappointing not to see any internal questions, even with a less empathetic hat on, even with a kind of what is a sensible sound politics, is someone, I thought there'd been an email to Jess Phillips saying, have you got thoughts on it?
What's
any
our package?
Of this?
Yeah.
There's more talk about Gaza and Israel in here than there, 100-fold than there is on anything like that. And I think that is a huge, huge shame and a massive missed opportunity. And again, this whole saga is not rooted in what it should be, which is people at the centre of this have been abused here. that's miles away from this. Instead, it's interesting and it's juicy stuff, but instead we're looking at letters that Peter Mandelson was writing and trying to become Chancellor of Oxford University.
Should we talk a bit about Peter Mandelson himself? Because I think the one person
Yes.
we feel like we know a lot more about after this tranche compared to the other tranches. Do you think there's going to be a time when we stop saying the word tranche? Today?
I don't know. We should call it a cluster if we're going to call it anything.
An omni-tranche. So Peter Mandelson, I think you can see, obviously there's a lot to criticise. He was quite good at his job.
I completely agree. I mean, I've got notes on style, but he, according to these messages, and Pat McFadden, who I have quite a lot of respect for too, I mean, they are quick to understand what the problems are and what should be done about it. And he's giving completely unsolicited advice the whole time, but it's not bad advice. And we have both been in Number 10. I mean, particularly on the political side, you're constantly getting very helpful messages from like party grandees who think that they've got a silver bullet for you. And you have often there's nothing you can do other than say, thank you so much. It's incredibly helpful. Of course, I'll pass this on to the PM. Whoop.
I think when you said that, I literally had a little echo. I've definitely stood there next to you while you've been on the phone saying that to somebody.
Yeah, of course. Like, thank you so much for your laminated note, which I now can't shred. There's
laminated for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is lots of that, but you're right. Some of he's saying the whole way through, you guys need to have a sound economic plan based around growth, and you need to have proper policies you can attach to it. And there needs to be leadership from the centre, and you also need to organise your team better. Like, this is good stuff mixed up with, unfortunately, just things I can't stand. Like, I've done a SWOT analysis of where we are as a government. SWOT being a
it's management consultancy.
Exactly. You know all this.
I've been many terrible things, but I've not been a management consultant.
All right then, Helen. SWOT stands for?
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats.
Said like a true SWOT yourself. But yes, I think, unfortunately, most of what he says is layered in the most kind of disgusting, obsequious language. And we'll happily talk about that.
I really, as a student of the dynamics of power, I really enjoyed watching there's no earthly reason why any of you should read 1,500 pages of this guff. But if you do read all of the messages that all of the ministers effectively have given their text exchanges with Peter Mandelson, it's a sort of study in the ebbs and flows of power in a really interesting way. So one of the things that I noticed, you think he's so smooth, Peter Mandelson, because on the night of the election in 2024 or the day after, he sends these individual, it's not like a group message like, well done lads, you smashed it, high five, move on, now let's get governing. It's like he writes these lovely personal messages to everybody, and at that point in his like rise and fall, quite often just doesn't even get a reply to some people. So he sends a nice message to Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, saying like, well, a railway town like yours will be so pleased to have a transport manager. It's like, nice, that's a good message, well done. She doesn't even reply. So there's this period of time when obviously Peter Mandelson is trying to get a job, and there's quite a lot of his campaign to become is it Vice Chancellor of Oxford as well?
I think it's the Chancellor.
The Chancellor,
yeah.
not the Vice one.
I mean, this is also an interesting exercise in campaigning, by the way, just as a bit of a side note. He's trying to become the Chancellor of Oxford. It ends up being William Hague in the end, but he contacts every Labour MP and Cabinet Minister who'd gone to Oxford to try and like get their network going. And he's quite often just sending, vote for me to people like Shabana Mahmood, who, again, I'm proud to say, does not reply.
Just left on red.
Just left on red. And I think, there he is hustling to get this thing done. It's such a lesson in, if you want it, don't give up on your dreams, and you've just got to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. It's so incredibly transparent and gross the way he packages what he wants in just the most sort of oily language you can possibly imagine, but it does seem to work in the end.
It does work, and you see this thing where he's kind of on the back foot, sending these messages saying, hello, you did a really good job, remember me?
Any way I can assist.
And all of that stuff. And then actually once he gets the ambassador job, the the shoes on the other foot. And the other person, the other side of the conversation is like, oh, congratulations on your new job. Like, can't wait to come out and see you in Washington. And he's like, yes. But like nothing, it just suddenly becomes a really dry texto in response with no real, and I obviously really enjoyed that.
Yes, I thought the other thing that was fascinating is how incredibly wide his net is cast. So obviously he's speaking to many people within the Labour Party. It's clear he's speaking to Conservatives. So there's text exchanges with Ed Llewellyn, who was David Cameron's chief of staff, who became a diplomat after that.
We should be clear that Ed Llewellyn is an ambassador, has been for a long time. So
yes,
I don't know if
let's just say he's rooted in the Conservative family. We have to also assume Peter Mandelson is speaking to actual Conservatives as well.
I'm sure he is, but we don't know that partly because Peter Mandelson refused to hand over his personal phone. Yeah. So I think there are 4 different mobile phone numbers for Peter Mandelson in these documents. There's 2 government phones. There's a Washington one, and seems to be another an American number and a UK number. And then there is reference a couple of times to messages on Signal, and that is and I think there might be someone's got PM Signal new number somewhere. So I don't exactly know how many phones we're talking about here, but the phone that we know is definitely not included is Peter Mandelson's personal phone. So whatever messages were on that shall remain a mystery. The other thing that I thought was really interesting for close readers was you can see there's a difference in tone between the people that Peter Mandelson would effectively see, the messages with people he'd effectively see as a peer from the Tony Blair government or people who are very Blairite. So there's a lot of long conversations with him and Pat McFadden. There's a conversation with him and Angela Smith, the leader of the House of Lords, and the difference in quality and openness and conversation in those messages versus what were either the Brownite camp, which you can see there's kind of his people are not his people, or people he's just more wary of, is really interesting because
he's very aware of Angela Rayner throughout, isn't he?
He's very, and he and Gordon Brown are not soulmates, I would say. There's strong, this episode has given strong feeling on both sides, but he's very clear about his views on Gordon Brown. And the Pat McFadden and Peter Mandelson exchanges about actually the diagnosis of where the Starmer government doesn't work and what's missing, and are really thoughtful, clever, interesting, serious people having a serious conversation. I think Pat McFadden comes out of it really well. Unfortunately, he has created a bit of a political bear trap.
I suspect at the next general election, particularly we have a different Labour leader in place, I'm not sure the Mandelson saga will necessarily be a reason people wouldn't vote Labour. But that Pat McFadden text when he says, I keep sitting in meetings with people telling me who else I could tax in order to give other people benefits, is so damaging. And the 2 tranches vary quite differently, the one we saw in February and the one we see now. And in February, it was getting closer to what this issue is actually about, which is what was the Prime Minister thinking, what information was he given to inform that decision. We're none the wiser on that, by the way. But this later tranche seems to be closer to how does the government actually work, what are ministers thinking, how can you have these strange people operating about, talking in management consultancy speak and using their business interests and so on. And it is, I think, in some ways, a kind of more existential crisis, this second tranche, not because of Mandelson at all, actually, or Epstein or any of what this is actually meant to be about, because it just shows at its very core the Labour Party doesn't think it's doing a good job, and they're kind of feeding the lines to the opposition parties.
Yeah, and I think of the many damning things about what Pat McFadden said, the big kind of cultural, historic view of the Labour Party was that they're just super good at spending other people's money. And Tony Blair and New Labour did quite a lot to move that argument somewhere else. We are straight back in it now. And actually, this whole thing just shows how good the government are at spending other people's money without really thinking about it. It's our money that's all been spent on this humble address nonsense, which is totally unnecessary. I would love to have a government that cared a bit more about those things. We're making those arguments more. I'm really sorry. You would like to see this, but not spending public money on this. It's not worth it. The second thing is there is no earthly reason. I've gone back to the humble address text, as you would imagine. There is no earthly reason why that message was published.
Totally.
So what advice that was given that meant that message with this hugely damning quote, which is about welfare spending. It's not about government policy on the appointment of Peter Mandelson or anything to do with foreign affairs or anything to do with anything in the scope of this humble address. What authority? That was published. It didn't need to be. So there's both the kind of how on earth is that been done, and also how are the government so underconfident that when they saw this, which is, I mean, red flag of red flags, the Conservative Party produced a poster within 2 hours.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a political mastermind to work out that's going to be problematic. Why didn't they turn around to the civil servants and say, hang on a second, are you really sure about this? We don't think you should be publishing that. Why didn't Pat McFadden say that? Yeah. If I was him, I'd be like, well, hang on a second. No, just no. No is sometimes a complete answer. And some of this there should have been a lot more no on we're not publishing this stuff. Other kind of interesting inside the weeds of the messages. So if you remember, Wes Streeting had boldly got ahead of the situation and published his own WhatsApps with Peter Mandelson.
I do remember.
You do remember. When he was still a government minister. He's obviously no longer a government minister. And it turns out that he hadn't, in fact, published the complete set of his messages.
Yes. And they weren't, they're not gotcha things, but there's a section where he's saying that Peter Mandelson masterfully teased someone at dinner. And then there's a meme of the Prime Minister in a Royal Mail uniform, which is referring to him taking the King's letter to Donald Trump in the Oval Office, which people might remember. And, you know, is that I suspect that is not meant in the huzzah spirit that you might imagine. It's potentially meant to be quite derogatory, but it's just seemed, you know, Wesley Snipes, what are you doing? If you're going to publish your own messages, publish your own messages. But it was not that, you know, considering how incredibly bamboozling this massive tranche of documents is, that was actually one of the easier things to work out. What had he told everybody in February and what's come out now? And it's just all a bit cozier and a bit bitchier than first implied. And I can't imagine it's terrific news for him in a possible impending leadership contest.
It just seems like a really bad judgment to try and get ahead of it by being transparent, and then not to be totally transparent is just smacking yourself in the face.
So notwithstanding what Wes Streeting decided to produce or not, there is, you know, interesting chit-chat on there where they decide to speak on the phone instead. You alluded earlier to people deciding to use Signal instead for some communications. I mean, aside from what people may have chosen to release out of their, you know, personal mobile phones or from their documents and so on. You know, this also speaks to personal experience for us from the COVID files, where I don't know if this is better or not, but embarrassingly, most of my messages were just like hearts for anything Chris Whitty said.
It's not embarrassing at all. Yeah. That's the appropriate response.
Yeah, he'd say something, I'd be like, thumbs up, Chris. But I suspect, but maybe you're wrong, this does not foster more open communication in government. And, you know, in future, if you are the team who are in charge of putting this kind of documentation together, do you have to expand the net further? You know, Signal is highly encrypted.
So you're right in saying that there's quite a lot of messaging in here, which you would expect is someone saying like, actually, let's chat on the phone. There's lots of phone calls. What is really striking to me is that as much as we've got the pages and pages of meeting, there was a meeting did happen. So we've got pages and pages of meeting and pages of phone call happened. There's no records of any of these things. Now, I am absolutely not saying, quite often, and definitely Emily Thornberry and her got into a right old state about this at her committee, that every single thing that everybody does should be recorded. Absolutely not. That way, complete madness lies. I don't remember seeing any formal meeting notes of meetings in these documents, and that is really weird.
Yes, and actually what you do see is the Prime Minister's private secretary on foreign affairs, who's a young woman, whose name I'm not going to say because I think we should take her name out of our mouths. It's not necessary for her to be named, but she's all over these papers because she is the poor person who's constantly trying to coordinate decisions, keep like government decisions on foreign affairs on track, and trying to communicate out what the Prime Minister thinks on certain things. So, you know, she's in here frequently on email. I really feel for her today because, you know, she is obviously doing an excellent job in very difficult circumstances. She is not a decision maker, to be totally clear. She's just in charge of like coordinating, communicating what her kind of political overlords think. And I don't think it's really fair that she's named in this and that so many of the emails that aren't redacted are her ones.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm quite interested in is that I think the big juice today is what are the WhatsApps between Pat McFadden and Peter Mandelson, or Wes Streeting and Peter Mandelson. What is less interesting by the sounds of things to most people is how the civil service are communicating around this stuff and how they are communicating with Peter Mandelson. It feels much more formal. It feels very polite. And to me, there was nothing to see there. But enter Helen. And for those people who don't know, an interesting thing about Helen recently is that she got her chainsaw degree. If that's what it's called. And so she can now, a bit like that chap in Argentina, she can now chainsaw her way through all this dead wood. And so when she read me these, she said, oh my gosh, listen to this. And she read me these letters and I was like, right, okay. And then she told me the translations for what's actually being said. And it is quite devastating, but no one will pick this stuff up. So perhaps we'll do a little exercise. Shall I read an Antonio Romeo or an Ollie Robbins email, Helen?
Yes. So you've got to have your fun where you can, right? And one of the bits of my fun is to admire, there's a couple of civil servants in here very much at the top of their game. So Antonio Romeo, who in this period was the Permanent Secretary of the Home Office, and Oliver Robbins, who was in this period Permanent Secretary of the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Neither of them are in those jobs anymore. One of them is the Cabinet Secretary, who actually sacked the other of them. So there we go.
Oh, good.
Times move on. So and there's a couple of exchanges. Antonia, there's obviously something that, and this is where the redactions are quite appropriate because it's to do with the Home Office. So you don't have to be a Jedi to work out that that's to do with security, that this debate is going on. Peter Mandelson has obviously decided that he wants to do something which is getting in the way of what the Home Secretary wants, and that's the kind of
stay in your lane, Peter.
Scene. Well, that is basically effectively what this says.
Okay. So here we go. This is from Antonio Romeo to Peter Mandelson, personal. Dear Peter, thank you for your support and engagement on Asterix, on which you have been working with Asterix. Your personal involvement has been instrumental in getting us to this point.
That just means get lost.
You'll be aware as we approach your meeting with X that this is a sensitive time. The Home Secretary has decided there should be no engagement with X on this issue until after your meeting with X has taken place. A position has been agreed. This is due to X.
Back off again.
I'm sure this has been fed back to you through usual channels, but given the importance of the issue and the strength of the Home Secretary's view, I thought best to flag with you directly.
That's like the most threatening thing you can do. I mean, even you don't have to be Antonia for that to be the most threatening thing you can do. You're the Permanent Secretary of the Home Office. You are sending a very clear message to the ambassador on behalf of the Home Secretary to say you have been told you are not doing this. What's really interesting and not surprising, but it definitely gave me pause for thought about how this might work in future bits of life. There is such a difference between civil servants speaking to civil servants and understanding the hierarchy, which is, I don't care who you are, Sunshine. You are Her Majesty's ambassador in Washington. You are not actually in charge of government policy on anything.
Yeah.
And because it's Peter Mandelson doesn't buy that at all.
Yeah.
So
I am PM.
That is a very strong, if you were a normal diplomatic civil servant and you got that sort of letter from the Home Office Permanent Secretary, you would know you were in quite a lot of trouble and you'd strayed quite far across your brief. I mean, there is many dynamics that have gone kind of astray out of normal governing here. One of them is Peter Mandelson is in this slightly or definitely believes himself to be in a slightly outsized political role and therefore is not obeying any of the normal things, but he's actually in a civil servant structure.
Yeah.
And he's been told both by Antonia and by Ollie Robbins at various other points, back off, that's not your business. And Peter Mandelson, you can see, is behaving as if he is the government. Like I thought our government was doing, the government view is this, my job for the government. It's like, hang on a second, your job is to fit quite clearly in the structure. Yeah. You actually work for the Foreign Secretary, you're in a different place. So you've got a politician who's in a sort of civil service role, a civil service diplomatic role, who's behaving like a politician. And then you've got civil servants entirely in the kind of wrong framing.
Helen, if I'm totally honest, I'm not spying any kind of major bombshells in this tranche. But I mean, do you think that's fair?
I think you've missed the accountability bombshell. So actually, of all of the things that happened yesterday, something properly unprecedented did, which is the civil service presented and prepared a whole set of documents themselves with no ministerial accountability, and that was presented to Parliament. So no minister was involved in the decision making and putting together any of these dossiers. And that just sort of shouldn't happen and couldn't be allowed to happen and isn't the way our country actually works. So it sounds really technical, but actually it's quite important, and I suspect that the government might in fact be regretting it. And if anybody thinks this is a good thing for democracy, they are wrong. So I don't think humble addresses are appropriate anyway. You shouldn't be able to force the government to live publish its workings out at the time. That's not how our constitution works. They have created an absolutely impossible situation for a future government. Absolutely impossible. So this government was on the back foot with the majority that it has. Like, imagine if you're a government, I mean, you'd have to imagine it. We had it in Brexit times with a really thin majority or minority, where you are in fact forced by Parliament to publish your work as you go. What the hell is going to be written down then if we have a coalition or a minority government next time around? I think it's really constitutionally problematic.
The great irony with the humble address is that it was Keir Starmer who sort of brought it back into fashion during the Brexit years. It was he who forced Theresa May to publish the advice she received from the Attorney General at the time.
Which was wrong.
Which was wrong. And so here we are, you sort of reap what you sow later on. I thought your point about not having ministerial oversight is so important, and I assume there's a deliberate reason for that, which is basically no one wants to essentially be in charge of it. And there must have been some conscious decision here. And you think, again, not only would that have seemed genuinely transparent and you'd had a figurehead who was making some decisions here and actually asking some of the right questions, and I imagine there's been all kinds of tussles with the Intelligence Committee and all that kind of thing. But also, they would have had their heads screwed on well enough to think, I don't think, guys, we should have as many references to our thinking on Palestine and Israel here, because if there's one thing the Parliamentary Labour Party really doesn't enjoy, it's lengthy discussion about that and us, talking about it behind the scenes and our internal squabblings about it and actually showing we're not quite sure where we sit on some of this stuff. Like, it doesn't need to be in there. It's gone way over. And this fits with what you were saying about the victim mindset, which is being quite passive and things happening to the government rather than someone taking charge. And it's a bit like the Tories have done it a bit talking about COVID, but the current government talking about inheriting 14 years of Tory rule or the situation in Iran. And yeah, you can be victims of circumstance sometimes. That's really difficult. But in a kind of pure political way, the public don't find it reassuring having people who are much more powerful and important than them saying, sorry guys, yeah, life is really crap at the moment, but it's just how it is and your bills are going to go up a bit. And
then they're not in charge. Yes. It's like it's so underconfident. There is something about the victim mindset, as you say, about there's this really great book about accountability and about how all we've done in modern life is create all of these structures which make all of us not accountable for anything. And that is the first 8 pages of this document are a case study in it's not my fault, there's nothing I can do, I'm trying my best, I've added on all these other people so it's their problem. So somehow all the permanent secretaries of Whitehall have been dragged into this as being accountable for whether the documentation is right or not. It's like, hang on a second, why have we made this everybody's problem and yet no one's problem and no one's accountability? And bluntly, civil servants should not be left to their own devices. And I say that with love. But this is a really good example of why actually ministers matter. Yeah. And you need to have a controlling, ministerial, political, accountable, parliamentary mind, which goes back to what is the point of this? You're not just doing it because you're doing it and therefore you're doing it and here we are. And it's this sort of self-flagellating, underconfident, awful kind of... It's like a cry for help.
But actually, the one of the great ironies, I think, with this big tranche of documents is it is a perfect metaphor for the circumstances in which the government finds itself at the moment. And it is in there with Peter Mandelson saying, Keir Starmer's not leading properly and his team isn't organised properly and no one knows where they're going on things. And that's clear with whoever's put this document tranche together as well. I mean, in this sort of anxiety to seem as transparent as possible, that's just patently not true because, you know, as sausages go, this one is absolutely loaded with sawdust. There's very little substantive meat in there at all. No one knows what the Prime Minister thinks. And no one really knows whether they should be pressing ahead with anything at all bold or interesting because as Peter Mandelson explains Morgan McSweeney's view, the whole time they're taking steps forward and then rolling over and taking steps back. We've seen it on welfare. We've seen it on winter fuel allowance. It keeps happening again and again that, you know, ministers, the civil service, whoever think, oh, I can take a step forward and I've been told there's been a reset and I can do something really bold now. And then they almost immediately are told, actually, no, shh, quieten down. Let's seem transparent. Let's seem like we're delivering. Let's seem like we're talking about change. And we'll be able to point to a few things that, you know, have been years in the making, to be honest, like immigration numbers coming down and hospital waiting times coming down. But basically, the situation is just going to rumble on as usual, which is, you know, why, when we get away from the metaphor, when we get into actually how the country's being run, people are turning to places like Reform and the Greens because they do actually want change. And the whole problem with these Mandelson files is it also gives the sense that everyone's the same at the centre of kind of power and the establishment. There are Peter Mandelson types everywhere, and essentially they're all tarred with the same brush. Everyone's at it. People want something new and different. It all just feels very tainted by the same thing. Stagnation.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Remember to follow the show on your podcast player of choice and give us a 5-star review if you enjoyed it.
And do please email us with any feedback and questions. Our email address is intheroom@independent.co.uk. And if you're listening on Spotify, you can leave little comments underneath, which we love to read. And you can keep up with the best bits of the pod on Instagram @intheroom.pod.
This podcast is part of the Independent Podcast Network and produced in association with Next Chapter Studios.
The executive producers are Carrie Rose and Olivia Foster, and the producer is Sam Durham.
A special mention to our content editor, Maya Anushka, our video editor, Vali Raza, and our videographer, Dan Faber.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.